Okay. For my book project, I read The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime by Mark Haddon. Mark Haddon is an English novelist who has won awards such as the Whitbread Award, the Dolly Gray Children's Literature Award, the Guardian Prize, and a Commonwealth Writer Prize for his work. The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is the work he is most known for. It is 220 pages long and has been praised by the New York Times, Ian McEwan, and the Boston Globe. There are very few characters in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, and even less main characters. The characters that are there, though, are complex and detailed. We will begin with Christopher John Francis Boone. Christopher John Francis Boone is the main character and narrator of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. He is 15 years, 3 months, and 2 days old, and he lives in Swindon, England, in House 36 in Randolph Street with his father, Ed Boone. Though never stated in the book, it is clear that Christopher has a mild case of autism. He exhibits erratic behavior, struggles to comprehend human emotions, and is exceptionally anal about specific aspects of his life. Christopher's autism and his personality lend him to be very intelligent, for he can name all of the countries of the world and their capital, and he knows every prime number up to 7,057. Christopher is also observant, sensitive, meticulous, and an extreme problem solver. He enjoys being alone, and in the book, he yearns for independence. Many of his likes and dislikes come from these traits. One of his prominent likes includes dogs. Since he cannot connect to humans very well, Christopher relates to dogs deeply and openly expresses his sadness when a particular dog dies in the book. Christopher's other likes include his pet rat Toby, math, science, informational documentaries, and the color red. On the contrary, Christopher often expresses his disdain for the colors yellow and brown, strangers, unexplainable things, jokes, and loud noises. Although he finds it difficult to relate to the people around him, he forms bonds with a few people over time. These people include Sivan, his school teacher, and his mother and father. With these people's help, Christopher's character develops tremendously over the course of this book. Moving on to Ed Boone. Ed Boone is Christopher's father, and he runs a heating maintenance and boiler repair business in Swindon, Christopher's hometown. He is newly divorced in the book and is also visibly bitter about the way his marriage ended. Ed is a loving, smart father who wants the best for his son and will go to extremes to keep Christopher safe. Throughout the story, it is evident that Ed works tirelessly to protect his son, but sometimes we can see that he struggles with understanding Christopher's behavior. For example, Ed often prepares meals specifically for Christopher, accommodating to his unique likes and dislikes, but he also gets visibly frustrated when his son misunderstands him. Behavior such as this visible frustration is typical for Ed throughout the story. His behavior is constantly on the extreme. He is seen many times verbally and physically releasing his anger on Christopher and making irrational decisions to keep Christopher's behavior at bay. We also see a lack of self-confidence within Ed. He often relentlessly apologizes for his acts, even if they were justified, and stutters through sentences when trying to talk through uncomfortable situations. Like his son, Ed struggles to make friends. The only friend mentioned in the book is Rodri, a fellow electrician at Ed's work. As the story progresses, we see Ed trying to regain a lost relationship with Christopher, and in this experience, we see this character lose his protective, rough exterior and gain a new, kind attitude. Our final main character is Judy Boone, or Judy Shears depending on the point in the book. Judy Boone, or Judy Shears, is the mother to Christopher and a very complex character in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime. During the course of the book, she works as a secretary and goes back and forth between being a mother figure for Christopher. As the story begins, Christopher is told Judy died of a heart attack, convincing the reader of this also. Later, though, we discover his mother had an affair with a neighbor and ran off before her supposed death. Because of this situation, Judy is displayed as the antagonist of the story. Not until we truly meet Judy do we discover her true identity. Judy is very impatient and describes herself in a letter as not a very good mother. On many occasions, the stress of Christopher's habits get on her last nerve, and she is sent spiraling out of control. Judy also exhibits an awful temper. She's shown hitting her husband, dragging Christopher out of stores, and getting cross with shopkeepers during Christopher's outbursts. On the contrary, Judy does have a motherly side. In many of her letters she wrote to Christopher, she explains how sorry she is for having a lack of patience, and she tries to comfort Christopher with kind words. Towards the end of the story, when Christopher comes to visit her, we see many positive traits of Judy. She is giving, understanding, gentle, and she is willing to sacrifice a normal life for Christopher. Judy is able to see her mistakes and work through them in order to live with her son once again. Moving on to the setting. The settings in the book, The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, are vital to Christopher's character development. At the beginning of the story, we see Christopher in his small town going about the same routine every day. This rigid routine represents Christopher's closed-minded thinking and lack of independence at the start of the book. As the story progresses, Christopher travels to London, and the reader sees his character view his full potential and gain a sense of pride as he experiences a big city. One of the main settings of the book I chose was Swindon, England in 1998. Swindon is a real location in England with a population of 155,700 people, but it is presented as the hometown of the fictional character Christopher Boone in this book. At the start of the story, Christopher seems to enjoy Swindon and the redundancy of his routine within this town, while his father Ed calls Swindon the of the world. Within Swindon, Christopher spends a majority of his time in his neighborhood and at his school. His neighborhood's name is never stated, but Christopher's address is noted to be 36 Randolph Street, Swindon, Wiltshire, in England. His school's name is also never mentioned, but it is said that the school is for people with special needs. Christopher's neighborhood is presented as a usual neighborhood with characters such as Mrs. Wise and her son, Mrs. Alexander, and a young black family at House 44. The houses on Randolph Street are located fairly close together, and each house has a garden. At the entrance to his neighborhood, there is a small store where Christopher regularly purchases candy and other food products. Inside of 36 Randolph Street, our main character spends most of his time in small locations, which is comforting to him. He stays in his room or hides in tight spaces where he can think. Christopher's house is of moderate size, but is quite roomy for him and his father due to the sudden removal of Judy Boone, Christopher's mother. Finally, a vivid description of Christopher's school is never given, but it is relatively small and heavily monitored due to the condition of its student population. Because of Christopher's love of learning, his school is very much presented as a warm, happy place for him. The second and final setting in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is in London, England, and the trains, known as the London Tube, that lead to this large city. These are both also in 1998. London is the real capital of England, but the fictional character Judy Boone lives there in this book. London, or more specifically Christopher's mother's home, 451C Chapter Road, London, is where Christopher escapes to after discovering an awful secret about his father. To escape Swindon, Christopher travels on the London Tube that moves the people of England around. The train station is a tunnel that has a ticket station, a cafe, a cafeteria, and stairs leading to different tracks. These tunnels are crowded, dirty, and highly noisy, which does not lend well to Christopher's extreme sensitivities. The people in the train station are also not pleasant to the narrator's autism. They are mostly rush, rude, and inconsiderate to Christopher's situation, causing him to pull out his Swiss Army knife on multiple occasions. Once Christopher completes his ride on the England trains, he arrives in London. London, England has a population of 8.136 million people. It is a large, loud, bustling city which Christopher does not enjoy. He describes the people of London as untrustworthy and the motion as unnecessary. Our main character eventually makes his way out of this city he despises and back to Swindon. Due to the rigid, no-nonsense personality of the narrator Christopher and the sad revelations made by him in the story, the mood of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is solemn and serious. Though Christopher's attitude takes a turn for the better at the very end of the story, for most of the book, the plot points are depressing, and they even cause Christopher to run away from home at a certain point of the book. In the first few chapters of this story, the mood of the book seems to be very melancholy and simple. Other than the discovery of a dead dog in his neighbor's front lawn, at the beginning of the book, Christopher is going to school every day, coming home to play video games, feeding his pet rat, and eating dinner with his father. It is not until the tension between him and his father builds that the mood begins to change to intense and dramatic. His father repeatedly screams at him about his interest in specific detective work, gets physical with him, and hides information from his mother away from him. The mood gets increasingly tense as Christopher runs away from home and confronts his fear of strangers, large spaces, and unknown places when traveling to London. Once Christopher successfully makes it to London, though, the sense of high tension and sadness continues to linger while Christopher and his mother reunite. This reunion brings a bittersweet feeling to the reader. For Christopher's father is still clueless of where his son is, and Christopher's mother is living with a man whom she had an affair with. Eventually, the book's mood changes to independence and fearlessness. After Christopher and his mother travel back to Swindon, Ed apologizes to his son, and Christopher passes his A-level math exam. He says, "I will get a first-class honors degree, and I will become a scientist. And I know I can do this because I went to London on my own, and because I solved the mystery of who killed Wellington, and I found my mother, and I was brave, and I wrote a book, and that means I can do anything." This statement alone provides a sense of pride. Though this revelation does add a new layer to the many moods of the book, Christopher still approaches his new confidence in his usual matter-of-fact way, which stays consistent with the serious and solemn mood of the book. The main issue in The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime revolves around Christopher's autism and how his family fails or succeeds at managing life with it. At the beginning of the story, Christopher discovers a dead poodle named Wellington in his neighbor's front lawn. Christopher then sets out to find its killer. This first problem, though it is the title of the book, only gives a platform for the other main issues. Christopher's interest in investigating Wellington's murder creates a great deal of tension between Christopher and Ed, and it leads to shocking discoveries from Christopher's past. Before the death of Wellington, Christopher's mother had an affair with Mr. Shears, a neighbor, and ran away with him. Ed wanted Christopher to remain oblivious to this, though, so he told his son that Judy had died of a heart attack. Later, in search of his investigation papers that were hidden away from him, Christopher discovers letters from his mother dated after her supposed death. When Ed discovers this, he is forced to admit his lies, and in frantic explanation, he admits to killing Wellington out of anger towards the Shears. All of Ed's lying and the newfound information about him murdering Wellington causes Christopher to be frightened of his father and lose all trust in him. Because of this, Christopher runs away to London to find his mother. During his travels, an issue seen in many parts of the book is once again revealed. Christopher has to manage his autism in a loud, crowded, high-pressure situation. He manages it, though, by using techniques he learned in school and focusing on his main goal of getting to London. When Christopher arrives in London, Judy is very kind, but her new partner is quite the opposite. Mr. Shears refuses to deal with Christopher, so Judy and Christopher travel back to Swindon. This creates a new issue between Judy and Ed, for they struggle to handle Christopher while living in separate houses. However, later, Christopher uses his new sense of independence gained in the climax, and the Boones find peace in a rather unusual situation. So in conclusion, communication, patience, and the lessons Christopher learned in the book help solve the main problem of the story. Now, using the aid of an original plot diagram I made, I will explain the significant events in my book. This book has a significantly short exposition, but within it, Christopher explains to the reader his inability to sense human emotion and recalls the time he talked to his school teacher about interacting in tense situations. Also in the exposition, we see him and his father go about their daily routine. This information provided gives us a look into Christopher's mindset and helps explain all of the otherwise odd narration. It paves the way for other main plot points. In the rising action, we see most of our story's events occur. First, Christopher discovers a dead dog named Wellington in his neighbor's yard, and then he begins to investigate its murder. This is a significant part of the story, for it is not only the title of the book, but it allows Christopher to discover many shocking details about his past. It also aids in revealing many of our main characters' traits early in the book. It shows Christopher's curious mind and Ed's feisty temper. All of Christopher's investigating creates tension between him and his father, and these negative emotions eventually lead to the climax of the story. Before this, though, our narrator talks to neighbors and discovers his mother had an affair in the past. This confuses Christopher, and many questions about the truth start spinning around in his mind. Other unknown facts about his parents begin to make themselves known when Christopher finds letters from his mother in his father's closet, and his father admits to killing Wellington. All of this information sends Christopher into a panic, which ultimately leads to the climax. The curious incident of the dog in the nighttime is when Christopher travels to London to meet his mother. I deduce this because all of the tension and fear were released from Christopher's mind after this point. Every other event led up to this. After this point in the novel, Christopher plainly states he now believes he can do anything. This proves that after traveling to London, facing his fears, and confronting the mother he thought was dead, Christopher changed. Since the climax is a decisive moment that is of high intensity and provides a major change to the main character or their situation, it was easy to figure that the trip to London was this book's climax. In his journey, Christopher faced loud noises, strangers, and unknown areas, which are his least favorite things. However, after, he reconciled with his mother and found peace in a new state of mind. In our falling action, Judy and Christopher travel home after Mr. Shears openly states his lack of desire for Christopher. This is where we see the change made in Christopher during the climax begin to present itself. When Judy and Christopher arrive home, they are confronted with Ed, whom Christopher is still afraid of. But he uses his bravery to confront his father and learn to live around him in harmony. Finally, in our falling action, Susie, a puppy, is given to Christopher. This is where Ed and Judy realize that they must come together and get along to benefit their son. Also here, we see the more vulnerable, brave, and new Christopher come out and forgive his dad for killing Wellington. Lastly, in the resolution, Christopher passes his A-level math exam and lives in Swindon with his parents, excited about the future. Passing his A-level math exam had been an ongoing goal of Christopher, and fulfilling it despite all the mess he had been through showed his pure perseverance. We see every loose end in the book get tied up, with his parents resolving their issues, Christopher forgiving them, and them all looking ahead to a brighter future. I would recommend The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime to almost any reader. This book offers interest to the vast majority of people. Its narrator, Christopher, who has a mild case of autism, provides a unique style to the book that makes the plotline and narration unpredictable and different. People looking for a knowledge-dense book can find interest divulging into math and science fact Christopher provides. Those who yearn for a touching, sensitive book will love the narrator's relationship with his mother and father. And those who like mystery novels will enjoy Christopher investigating a murder, an affair, and a complicated past. The book's plot is relatively simple, but Christopher interjects with multiple interpretations of the world around him, and it gives the book an intriguing aspect that most books lack. For example, on page 64, Christopher describes the Monty Hall problem, his favorite riddle. This riddle is a complex math problem which shows how to win a hypothetical game show. This problem had nothing to do with the plot, but it provided an interesting look into the narrator's way of thinking. One of the most prominent accomplishments of this book is the outstanding character development. This book had only 3 main characters, but each of them were intricate and detailed. They each had strengths and weaknesses that lent them to be repulsing at times and lovable at times. Christopher began as a closed-minded, stubborn boy who let his sensitivities get the best of them. At the end of the book, though, as previously mentioned, Christopher states, "And then I will get a first-class honors degree, and I will become a scientist. And I know I can do this because I went to London on my own, and because I solved the mystery of who killed Wellington, and that means I can do anything." This shows how he grew into a brave, young, independent man. Christopher's parents also grew significantly throughout the book. At the resolution, they are at ease with their difficult situation, but they were both impatient and frustrated by Christopher's condition at the beginning. They also live apart at the beginning, which causes some major issues, but in the end, they learn how to get along despite their problems. This change in each character's heart provides a more sensitive, heartwarming layer to this story. Next, the plot of The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime was excellent. The plot twists were believable yet shocking, and Mark Haddon was brilliant in connecting each part of the story to every single character. The plot also built very well. On many occasions, the reader could see where scenarios were getting more and more intense until they finally reached their peak. Every plot point always left the reader satisfied and wanting more. Though The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime is an outstanding page-turner, there are a few downfalls. To begin, the pacing of the book is inconsistent and uncomfortable. At the start of the story, the author dives into the book's first plot point almost immediately, leaving no exposition. The very first sentence of the book is, "It was 7 minutes after midnight. The dog was lying on the grass in the middle of the lawn in front of Miss Shear's house. Its eyes were closed. The dog was dead." In some cases, this fast-paced style is nice. It makes the book easy to read and leaves you wanting more. But in other cases, it's abrupt and comes across as lazy writing. On the other hand, many portions of this book are prolonged. Christopher takes pages and pages to explain his thought process on various things. While interesting, this narration does slow the advancing of the plot and detracts from the intensity of individual moments. I believe at times the pacing was fitting for this book, but other times it made the book uncomfortable and slow. Finally, the choice of who and what situations to describe was odd and at times confusing. Many characters vital to the plot, such as Mrs. and Mr. Shears, were loosely defined, while a character such as Mr. Jeevons was described in detail. Christopher states, "Mr. Jeevons smells of soap and wears brown shoes that have approximately 60 tiny circular holes in them." A portion of these unusual in-depth descriptions came from Christopher's autism, but the lack of reason for various things such as Ed's hate for Mrs. Shears or Judy's love for Mr. Shears was never given. Lastly, certain characters appeared often, but their backstory or relationship to other characters was never stated. This type of character includes Sayaban. She was mentioned heavily over the course of the story, but never truly played a role in the plot. Overall, I give The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime 4 out of 5 stars. Its main characters, plot, and narration are beautiful and enticing, but the pacing and odd choice of description placement detracted from its overall appeal. Also, this book managed to entertain very well while also being informative and sensitive. Based on The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, I would be very interested in reading more of Mark Haddon's work. The Curious Incident of the Dog... Inside of 36 Random. Coming! The real location in England. I've done all of this. in his neighbor's front yard. No, not front yard. In his neighbor's front yard. At the beginning of the story, front lawn, front lawn, front lawn, front lawn. In his neighbor's front yard. Why? After her supposed... That's a long sentence. Why do I write such long sentences? He manages it. I got that right. Can't... This is where Ed and Julie